Have you ever been watching the Harry Potter films and thought to yourself, I wonder who the most magical character in the series is. The character who uses the most spells and displays the most magical talent over the course of the movies. Of course, after this thought, you, like most normal people, finish the movie and proceed to curl up in a ball on your bed, wondering how it's been over 20 years since the release of the first movie, and how old you now feel. Well, prepare to have your idle curiosities answered, as I have done the work of the people, and in this video, we will find out precisely who is the most magical character in the Harry Potter movies. Now, you might be asking yourself, what methodology did I use to determine the magicality of any given character in a quantifiable manner? And the answer is quite simple. I just counted the amount of on-screen spells each of the characters use. One spell is equal to 1 point, and the character who has used the most spells by the end of the series is the most magical. There are some potential shortcomings in this method of determining the most magical character, in that it values quantity of magic rather than quality. For example, when Dumbledore magically lights a candle, he gets the same amount of points as when he creates a flaming tornado of death. While both are impressive uses of fire-based magic, many might consider the latter to be a greater indicator of his overall magicalness. But for the purposes of this video, they are the same. Equal. The reason for this is because when you start passing personal judgment on how magical any given spell or ability is, the result becomes much more subjective. So in order to avoid my own biases when evaluating spells, each time a spell is used on screen, no matter how massive or visually spectacular,
that still only counts as one!
However, the question is who is the most magical character in Harry Potter, not who uses the most spells. So I will be counting some additional abilities that I don't consider to be spells, but add to a character's magical output. Things like speaking Parseltongue, a magical language, and being an animagus will also be taken into account. Things that won't count are potions, using magical devices, failed spells, or werewolf transformations. You might think it weird that I'm counting animagus but not werewolf transformations, but for me, it's all about the intent. For a werewolf, I see the transformation as something magical being done to somebody, rather than somebody doing something magical. More like Malfoy being involuntarily turned into a ferret than McGonagall intentionally turning into a cat. This is kind of my same thinking when it comes to potions and magical devices, as it feels less like a person is being magical, and more like something magical is being done to them, or they are using something magical. With that out of the way, it's time to find out just who is the most magical Harry Potter character. Spoilers ahead for the series.
Of course! Here it is. Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone.
The what?
Now, I was actually a little surprised at the results I got in Philosopher's Stone. I feel like there's been this idea floating around for the longest time that Harry doesn't use any spells at all throughout the first outing in the series. I personally didn't remember him doing much magic in the first film, so going into it I expected him to get 1 or 2 points max. However, even though he doesn't really use any actual spells, he does show a number of occasions where he is oozing with magic. At the zoo, he gets 2 points for when he makes the glass of the exhibit vanish and when he has a nice chin wag with the snake. Then, at Ollivander's, when he is getting his wand, he displays 3 separate instances of magic. He is the first to magically get his broom to come to him, and he caps off the film with his magic hands. It really is a random medley of scraps that reveals that even though he does not yet have a strong grasp on magic, he is oozing with potential. He caps out at 7 points in Philosopher's Stone, which is considerably more than I thought he would get. In fact, it's good enough for him to tie for first as the most magical character in the first movie. The person that he shares the honor with is none other than Hermione Granger, who also has 7 points, but does it in a much different way. Unlike Harry, who doesn't really know what he is doing, Hermione is showing off her magical prowess. Of the 7 spells she uses, 6 of them are unique, with her only doubling up with Alohomora. Whenever the gang needs something done, it usually falls to Hermione in this film to step up and pull some spell you've never heard of out of thin air. Unlike the other 2 members of the Golden Trio, Ron Weasley is not nearly as magical out of the gates. There are a lot of instances of Ron attempting spells and failing throughout the movie, like when he tries to turn the grown man that's sitting on his lap yellow, when he conks himself in the head with his broom, or when Hermione stunts on him during the iconic Wingardium Leviosa lesson.
You're saying it wrong. It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
He only actually performs 1 spell successfully in the whole movie. that being when he knocks out the troll with his newfound levitation mastery. Unfortunately, I think this is pretty indicative of how the movies treat Ron, as moving forward, he is seemingly underutilized in terms of his magical impact. Other notables in the first movie are Hagrid, who quickly runs his score up to 3 before staying there for the majority of the series. I was convinced that this was it for Hagrid, but he actually does some magic in one of the later movies. Voldemort, despite being a growth on the back of Quirrell's head for most of the movie, gets a respectable 3 points, most of which come from the flashback when Hagrid is telling Harry how his parents died. Voldemort's roommate matches him at 3, all of which came in the final confrontation with Harry. Seamus Finnegan actually manages to get more points than both Ron and Draco, as each of them have 1 while Seamus has 2. Now, some might disagree with me awarding Seamus 2 points, considering my no failed spells rule, but as you can see, his feather is very clearly floating, and even though we don't get the confirmation,
Turn this water into rum.
I'd bet anything that his cup is not filled with water, but a well-aged, exquisite rum. It just so happens that he is also exploding with magical ability. There were a total of 32 spells used throughout Philosopher's Stone, which makes it the film with the second fewest amount. The top 5 most magical characters were Harry and Hermione with 7 each, followed by Hagrid and the Doe Duo with 3 apiece. These are all the characters that got a point in the movie.
The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware.
Despite being the longest movie in the series, Chamber of Secrets had the fewest displays of magic, with 1 fewer than Philosopher's Stone, bringing its total to 31. Harry gets the same total as last time with 7, except he manages to use some actual spells this time around. With Rictum Sempra, Wingardium Leviosa, and some Ariana Exame, Harry is on the way to becoming a first-rate wizard. However, he is still relying on his innate magical abilities as he is carried hard by his Parseltongue, which is the reason he gets so many points. Hermione slows down a little in this movie, thanks in part to her being petrified for a large duration of it. Still, she manages to pull off 3 unique spells before she goes nighty-night. Ron doubles his output from the first film, locking in 2 solid points. Considering he had a broken wand to work with, 2 is admirable, even though he ended up as the victim of one of his own spells. Draco asserts himself a little bit here, after a quiet first outing. The dueling lesson really gave him a chance to show off his magic, as he uses 2 spells that we never see again in the whole series. The real star of Chamber of Secrets though is Dobby, bursting on the scene as a fundamentally magical being. Even though he performs a variety of different displays of magic, from vanishing to knocking Lucius on his ass, I categorized all of the magic he performs as elf magic. Dobby actually manages to deny another character a point, as Lucius was primed to murder Harry in broad daylight with the killing curse, and was only thwarted because of the Dobmeister. The legendary Gilderoy Lockhart keeps up the tradition of the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher getting 3 points. And again, Voldemort does a lot with a little, as he manages to get 4 points mostly from a flashback scene in the movie's final encounter. The most magical character for Chamber of Secrets is once again Harry with 7 points, followed by Dobby with 6, Voldemort with 4, and Hermione and Lockhart tying with 3. If we take a look at the full list for this movie, Dumbledore is a notable absence, as he did not use a single spell. He only had 1 point in the first movie, and I think it's interesting how in the early movies we really don't get to see him in action, which I think really helps when in the later movies we see his full power.
Who is that? Who is... That is Sirius Black, that is.
Harry comes hot out of the gate in this one, with some serious Lumos spamming. Now you might be saying, the scene is dumb, because it's against the rules for students to use magic outside of school.
We're not allowed to do magic away from Hogwarts. You know that.
Harry doesn't care though, he's trying to pad his score. He does just that with 5 Lumoses before bed. Lumoses aside, I kind of had a feeling going into this one that Harry was going to significantly increase his score. The fact that he had a competent teacher for once helps, as Harry actually learns something in this movie, with the Patronus charm having a particular focus. Harry successfully uses it 3 times, which was actually a little surprising as I expected him to use it a bit more. He also gives us a double dose of Expelliarmus, which is thought of by most of the fandom to be his signature spell. This really is Harry's Lumos arc though, as he adds another one later in the movie for good measure. Ron and Hermione kind of take a back seat in this one, at least from a magic perspective. They each only get 1 point, with Ron getting a spider into roller skating, and Hermione waiting until the very end of the movie before using Bombarda to free Sirius. Similarly, Draco has left his initial role as a worthy adversary to Harry, and is now entering his arc where he is almost irrelevant except for being a pest every now and again. His only magical contribution in this movie is making a paper bird fly. Prisoner of Azkaban introduces Lupin, who has a strong magical run. As a teacher who actually teaches, he demonstrates the spells, like Ridiculous and the Patronus Charm, adding to his own totals in the process. His arrival at the Shrieking Shack further bolsters his numbers, as he performs a number of spells there. However, in order to keep up with Harry, he needs to find his own Lumos, and he does just that, as he magically lights 5 candles individually. It's not much, but it's honest work. Also, when Peter Pettigrew is turned back into his human form against his will, I wasn't able to tell which one of Lupin or Sirius actually did it, so I just awarded them each half a point. Snape has a bit of a coming out party, as he totals 8 points for this film. I would have thought that a majority of these points would have come from the Shrieking Shack, but over half of them come from when he filled in teaching for Lupin earlier in the movie. Characters that are too wizardy to do mundane tasks without magic really bolster their scores. Lupin does this too when he is packing, because if you have the option to magically close your suitcase, or to do it normally like a muggle, I'd think the answer obvious. A couple of characters make their first magical appearance. We get our first Weasley twin sighting, as George gets a couple of points while explaining the Marauders map. Unfortunately, Fred doesn't get any here, creating an imbalance between the two. Neville finally gets on the scoreboard, as he gives Snape a hot new look. In Prisoner of Azkaban, a total of 50 spells were used, putting it at the 3rd lowest for the series. As the story matures and gets progressively larger in scale, it makes sense that the amount of magic we see grows in accordance. Once again, Harry is the most magical character, barely edging out Lupin with 14 points to Lupin's 13.5. I probably should have expected that Harry would be the out-and-out leader, considering that the series is named after him. He's the main character, has the most screen time, and we see almost everything from his perspective. But when I was recording this data, I was honestly a little shocked by his domination in getting the three-peat. I was starting to wonder if any one film would have a character not named Harry be the most magical. Snape gets 3rd place with 8 points before a bit of a drop-off with Sirius getting 2.5 points. 2 of which are from Animagus transformations, and Dumbledore and George tie for 5th with 2 points each, respectively. Here are the rest of the characters with a point in this movie.
Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?
No, sir.
You asked one of the older students to do it for you?
No, sir.
For the first time, Harry is not the most magical character for a movie, which oddly enough is a little surprising. I didn't expect Harry to be the most magical character for the first 2 films, because he really didn't know any magic. Goblet of Fire, though, was one of the movies I did expect him to lead. As for the majority of it, we are focused on him completing tasks for the magical tournament. He still does get a considerable amount of points in 9, a good few of those coming at the end, with his final confrontation with Voldy. But it is the Snake Man that ends up getting the better of the boy who lived, as Voldemort is the most magical character in Goblet of Fire. He gets an early Avada Kedavra off with killing Old Man Jenkins, but for most of the movie he is little more than an amoeba. When he regains his body, he puts on a magical clinic, shooting himself quickly up the ranks. He performs all 3 of the unforgivable curses in short order, and does some other crazy magic, like give Peter a brand new shiny hand. Even though he performs all 3 of the unforgivable curses, he is not the first to do so, as his henchman, Barty Crouch Jr., beats him to the punch, and performs them in a classroom earlier in the film. They are also the only 2 characters in the series to perform all 3. Although there are a couple other characters that get 1 or 2. Crouch Jr. does a lot of spells in his only appearance in the series, a lot of them coming pretty early in the film. I've always felt that he was killed off too soon, as I think he had a big impact in his short time, and I think he would have made a great recurring villain. Something I didn't expect was for the man whose face Barty wears for most of the film to get a point in his own right. Despite barely appearing, Moody actually scores a point, as he stuns Barty in a flashback. I was also curious to see how many points the other Triwizard champions would get. Initially, I was a little surprised by how little they got. But when you remember that we don't get to see a lot of their tasks because we are following Harry's perspective, it makes sense. Ceddy Diggs and Crumb are each shown using 2 spells on screen. On the other hand, Fleur is not shown a single time using a spell on screen. This was actually a little shocking, because even though they don't get much screen time, the other champions feel like a big part of the story. Where I decided to take a little pity on Fleur is that even though we don't see her do it, we do see that at some point she used the bubble charm, so I decided to count that. My boy Ceddy Diggs did the same thing, so he gets his stats buffed as a result. This is Dumbledore's first big movie, as he gets 8 points. However, a lot of the spells he uses are best served for him as a presenter and master of games. A lot of them are for showmanship or to get the attention of people with a sonorous spell. Still, it's interesting to see him having a big jump from previous outings. There were 55 spells used throughout the 4th film, which puts it 5th overall. The 5 most magical characters in the movie were Voldemort at number 1 with 14 points, Barty Crouch Jr. as number 2 with 10 points, Harry number 3 with 9, Dumbledore in 4th with 8, and Peter Pettigrew coming in 5th with 3. Peter gets all of his points as he kills Ceddy Diggs and prepares a baby Voldemort soup. Notably absent from the list of people with points are Ron, Hermione, and Draco. As far as Draco goes, I think it's the continuation of him being put on the sidelines without anything to really do, especially with Harry having much bigger fish to fry. Ron and Hermione were a little more surprising, but I guess it speaks to the focus of the tournament. This is the only movie in the series where neither Ron or Hermione register a point.
His headquarters.
Of the Order of the Phoenix. It's a secret society. Dumbledore formed it back when they first fought you-know-who.
This is where the films take off in terms of amount of magic performed. It's also where things get significantly more difficult to tally as they stop using incantations more and more, opting instead for non-verbal spells, leaving me to try and decipher what any given spell is. They also start shooting them off insanely quickly, really making me do a frame-by-frame analysis during some of the dueling sequences to make sure that I counted them all correctly. I had to be on my toes while recording the data for the Department of Mysteries fight, because in the background there might be a barely visible fight going on. After his brief stay in 3rd place last movie, Harry is back on top, with the film leading 16 spells. Not too surprising, as he spends a lot of the film teaching Dumbledore's army and gets in a few duels during the climax of the film. It's notable that this is the first time he uses an unforgivable curse, after Bellatrix kills Sirius. Ron and Hermione both had a bounce-back movie. Ron gets his film high up to this point with 4 spells, and Hermione gets back to her first film high with 7. Dumbledore's army does a lot to spread the love, as Ginny, Luna, and Neville each record 4 points, and characters like Fred and George make their first noteworthy splash. I will say though that the way I am quantifying this doesn't do the twins any favors, as even though they invent their Weasley products and have a big fireworks bash, these things aren't really reflected in the stats. The Kingmaker really is the fight at the Department of Mysteries, and the duels that occur therein. The duel between Sirius and Lucius really rises both of them to the top of the magical character list for this film. They are flinging spells at one another like they're going out of business, as well as using Protego in equal amounts. Sirius transforms into his Animagus form once, and Lucius apparates a few times. And yes, I am counting turning into smoke as apparating. But other than that, all of their points come from their duel. Similarly, Dumbledore and Voldemort each get a substantial amount of points in 8 and 9 respectively, largely thanks to their show-stopping fight. This is probably the most visually spectacular fight in the entire series, and really displays the power of each of its combatants. Draco lays another goose egg in this movie, increasing his streak of no-spell movies to 2. James Potter actually manages to get a couple points from Beyond the Grave, as he uses Expelliarmus and Impedimenta to bully a young Snape. Order of the Phoenix boasts a hefty 130 spells, good enough to make it the movie with the second most spells in the series. As already mentioned, Harry is the most magical character in this movie, followed by Sirius with 13, and Lucius and Umbridge tying with 10. Most of Umbridge's magical usage is just her being a buzzkill. Voldemort ties Moody for the last spot in the top 5. Order of the Phoenix boasts a pretty big magical list, with the love being shared by a large variety of characters.
I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
Although its magical output is not nearly as high as its predecessor, managing only 74, Half-Blood Prince definitely has some magical moments as we see Harry and the gang continue to gain more spells in their arsenals. Harry himself uses a few spells that we have yet to see, like Aguamenti and Sectum Sempra. He was already having a great outing, but he really wanted to drive it home, as he casts every spell he has ever heard of during his fight with the Inferi. We also get to see some more spectacular magic from Dumbledore as he steps fully into focus throughout this film. His Flaming Inferno is the obvious highlight, but he is a constant magical presence as he apparates on a number of occasions, showing that he is a rebel who breaks the rules.
So I thought you couldn't apparate within Hogwarts?
Well, being me has its privileges.
Snape also sees an increased role as he and Dumbledore have a magical interaction that has not only become legendary in the fandom, but was the basis for one of the biggest planned spoil raids in history.
Snape kills Dumbledore.
In Half-Blood Prince, Snape shows himself a master of the dark arts, as well as potion making, a magical savant in many ways. We don't get to see the spell he himself created, but he still shows his magical ability throughout the film. The Death Eaters seem to have a large magical focus in this film, as Bellatrix and Fenrir Greyback perform some noteworthy magic. Seeing Bellatrix with so many spells makes sense, but I was shocked to see Fenrir with such a substantial tally. Most of it can be chalked up to his smoky apparating, but surprising nonetheless. I've always thought of Half-Blood Prince as Draco's standout film, as for the first time in the series he is given something to do besides be a pest, allowing for his character to be explored in new ways. This is probably the largest role he plays in the series, and his magical output reflects that, as he has his best outing with 5 points, which is 1 point short of being in the top 5. I wouldn't have guessed that Draco would have been beat out by the likes of Fenrir, but here we are. Most of the DA fall back down from their highs of the previous film, but Luna and Ginny still hold relatively strong. Luna does some quirky magic, while Ginny gets most of hers from combat, both seemingly fitting for the characters. Ron and Hermione have a quiet outing, with Ron only avoiding the goose egg last second, and Hermione having her magic use based around her love life. There are a substantial amount of characters that got on the board last minute, as they paid tribute to their fallen headmaster and raised their wands in salute, shining a light and removing the dark mark in the process. I only gave points for this to characters that I could actually see, as trying to guess characters based on seeing nothing but their arm is rather tricky. Harry is the most magical character for Half-Blood Prince, followed by Dumbledore, Snape, Bellatrix, and Fenrir. Voldemort is notably absent as he doesn't appear in this film, but he will more than make up for it with the next 2.
Together they make the Deathly Hallows. Together they make one Master of Death.
Because the first part of Deathly Hallows is so focused on the Golden Trio, there are not nearly as many characters with a substantial magic count, but the characters that are featured really rack up the points. For instance, Harry uses a total of 35 spells himself, more than the total number for each of the first 2 movies. This is his series high, and is thanks in large part to when they try to destroy the Horcrux, using protective charms, magical transportation, and his fight at Malfoy Manor. He is really giving it his all in this film, and you can see how far he has come magically. Joining Harry on the magical podium are his friends, Hermione and Ron. Hermione kept pace with Harry for a while, but the Chosen One ultimately pulled ahead. However, Hermione still accrued a massive 25 spells, good enough to be her own personal best, and the 4th highest of anyone in any given film. Like Harry, Hermione gained her massive tally through apparating, trying to destroy the Horcrux, and using protective charms. Despite having his uncontested best outing giving him his only top 5 magical finish, Ron is still significantly behind the other 2 members of the trio, with a total of 11 points. This is not all that unexpected, as for a portion of the movie he is injured before dipping out for a large period of runtime. When he does return, he adds a lot to his spell count through his duel with the Malfoys. Voldemort is very active throughout, even though most of the time we see him it is through his connection with Harry. He does his usual Avada Kedavra spam. Dobby makes a splash in his return, not only literally saving the day, but doing it in a way where he racks up his magical count. In Dobby's 2 appearances throughout the franchise, he achieves a top 5 magical ranking in both films. Save for Lucius, who gets dunked on, the other Malfoys put up a decent fight, and their numbers reflect that. Bellatrix pulls out a number of WTF spells that I didn't even bother to try and decipher, before she resorts to an old-fashioned knife to send tons of fans into tears. Given that they only show up briefly for the first part of the movie, I was surprised to see characters like Moody and the Weasleys get on the scoreboard. Hagrid makes his grand return as he is seen in the background helping to prepare the tent. Newly introduced Bill Weasley is the king of background magic, as he too helps with the tent and has a fight as well. Deathly Hallows Part 1 comes in third for amount of spells used, as it has 129, with over half of that coming from its 3 main characters. As I've already gone over the top 5, here is a brief look at the full list for the film.
But what if the one never belonged to Snape? What if its allegiance was always to someone else?
Deathly Hallows Part 2 has the most magic featured in any of the films, and it's not particularly close, as it stomps its competition with a massive 168-point performance. This was to be expected, as the final film is the ultimate climax of the series, and the Battle of Hogwarts takes up most of the film's time. While there is still a focus on the Golden Trio, it is much more even than its predecessor, and Ron and Hermione, while still putting up good performances, are both unable to make the top 5. Hermione uses a lot of her magic early through their robbery of Bellatrix's vault. She's the instigator in the dragon escape plan and has a few moments throughout the Battle of Hogwarts that help her reach 10 points. Ron still manages a respectable 6 points, but it feels a little more uneven. Early on, he uses his first unforgivable curse, which is neat, but perhaps more interesting is the fact that later on in the film, while trying to kill Nagini, it looks like he uses the killing curse. It would make sense, and it's not confirmed by any means, but the green of the spell implies it. It caught me a little off guard, but I could see how in such a desperate moment he would use it. Much of the top 5 is filled with duelists in Snape and McGonagall, and Bellatrix and Molly Weasley. The McGonagall-Snape bout has the Transfiguration Professor all offense. As she is flinging fire at Snape, he doesn't use a single offensive spell, choosing to only use Protego, and deflect the attacks into the Carrows. The duel between the two gives each of them most of their magical output for the film, but they each have a couple other moments where they use magic. The fight between Molly and Bellatrix is similar in that it propels them greatly up the ranks. Once again though, I feel like someone is using the killing curse and it's not the person you'd expect. The spells Molly is throwing look green in nature. It makes me wonder if Molly threw a few Avada Kedavras out in the heat of her anger. The spell that ultimately kills Bellatrix is something else entirely, so maybe it's not the case, just thought it was worth pointing out. Harry and Voldemort hold nothing back as they fight to the death in their final duel. I honestly expected Harry to build on his performance in part 1, but he actually had a smaller magical output this time around, though still massive compared to most other characters. He totaled 29 spells, with a lot of them being the usual suspects of Stupefy and Expelliarmus. However, his default really did become Protego, as for much of the fight he was just trying to survive the flurry of attacks Voldemort was hurling his way. Speaking of Voldemort, the Dark Lord has the single highest magical output of anybody in any of the films, topping out at a ridiculous 49 points. He had some unique spells and used some legitimacy to communicate with the people of Hogwarts, but what really set him apart was his continued strategy of Avada Kedavra spam. It's noteworthy that according to book canon, Avada Kedavra cannot be blocked, but that is not the case in the movies, as Harry is blocking it left and right, as Voldy unloads on him. The duel between the two ends with Voldemort using Avada Kedavra and Harry using Expelliarmus, as is tradition. Kinda weird how Voldemort gets Thanos snapped though. The top 5 most magical characters for part 2 are Voldemort, Harry, McGonagall, Molly, and Snape. As we look at the full list, I kind of wanted to make note of Kingsley, who takes over where Bill left off in part 1 as the background magic maestro. He manages 5 spells with barely any focus.
Gryffindor wins the House Cup.
To no one's surprise, the most magical character in the Harry Potter franchise is none other than Harry Potter himself.
It was pretty obvious.
Totaling 136 points over the 8 movies. Second place is Distant, with Voldemort coming in at 87, over half of that being in the final movie. Hermione comes in at 3rd with 56 points. Snape is 4th with 38, Dumbledore 5th with 32, Ron just misses the top 5 with 26. The rest of the top 10 features Bellatrix, McGonagall, Sirius, and Lupin. 63 different characters registered a point for a combined magical output of 670. Dividing them by house, Gryffindor is the most magical Hogwarts house with a total of 373 shared by 24 characters. Slytherin is in second with 221 shared by 15 characters. Third place doesn't actually belong to Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff, but to the random assortment of characters who either didn't attend Hogwarts or have no canon house affiliation. Then comes Ravenclaw with 22 points from 6 characters, and last but not least is Hufflepuff with 7 points, shared by the only 2 confirmed members of Hufflepuff who registered a point, in Tonks and Seti Diggs. Over the series, Harry used 38 unique spells, with his top 5 most used spells being Stupefy, Protego, Lumos, Expelliarmus, and Apparition. Despite Harry using 80 more spells than Hermione, Harry only used 7 more unique spells than Hermione did, as she used 31. It shows that once Harry found a favorite spell, he really liked to use it. In a similar vein, of Voldemort's 87 spells, 31 of them were Avada Kedavra, accounting for 35% of his total output. The 10 most used spells were Stupefy, Protego, Apparating, Avada Kedavra, Lumos, Expelliarmus, Incendio, Wingardium Leviosa, Expecto Patronum, and Elf Magic. Considering that it is natural that the characters who got the most screen time had the highest magical totals, I decided to also calculate which character was the most magical per minute. By taking a character's total magical output and dividing it by their amount of screen time and multiplying it by 60, I reached the conclusion to who was the most magical character per minute. It wasn't Harry, who with 539 minutes of screen time, his magical per minute score put him 48th overall. Similarly, Hermione and Ron were equally low, with Hermione coming in at 45th and Ron coming in at 55th. It should be expected that none of the characters with a lot of screen time would have a high magic per minute, but there was a few surprises. 10 characters achieved a magic per minute equal to or greater than 1. The top 5 are Yaxley, Voldemort, Bellatrix, Moody, and Fenrir Greyback. Voldemort and Bellatrix were surprising, as I thought both of them had significantly more screen time than they actually did. Thinking that Bellatrix was only on screen for just over 10 minutes is crazy when you consider how memorable of a character she is. Also, her and Voldy were firing off spells every 2 seconds, making their high magical output seem even more impressive when considering their limited screen time. I expected the magic per minute leader to be someone like Fenrir, who had such a small amount of screen time, but a decent magical output. Overall, this was a fun little experiment, and I hope you enjoyed it. We can now say with quantifiable proof that Harry Potter is the most magical character in the Harry Potter series. Although, now that I say it out loud, maybe this video wasn't necessarily and it was pretty self-evident. Oh well. If you somehow made it to the end of the video, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate if you liked and subscribed. It helps the channel a lot. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.